The mining asteroid designation XK 7742 hung in the darkness like a tumor against the star field. Its surface bristled with extraction equipment and prefabricated structures that housed the worst kind of sentient beings the galaxy had to offer. This was where slavers brought their most valuable merchandise, where illegal experiments took place far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Council, and where hope came to die. Zephyros had been watching the asteroid for 3 cycles now, his massive draconic form coiled around a dead planetoid several thousand kilometers away. His scales, each one the size of a dinner plate, shifted from deep purple to black as his mood darkened. Ancient golden eyes, each larger than a human head, tracked the ships coming and going from the facility with predatory focus. The Valdris were running this operation, and that alone made his blood burn hotter in his veins. Insectoid slavers with a particular taste for suffering. They had been a plague on this sector for decades. Their chitinous exoskeletons gleamed like oil in the light of the nearby star, and their compound eyes saw only profit in pain. Zephyros was old, even by dragon standards. He had lived for over 3,000 years, had seen empires rise and fall, had witnessed the birth of new species and the extinction of others. In all that time, he had learned to pick his battles carefully. Dragons were powerful, yes, but they were not immortal, and making enemies of entire criminal cartels was a sure way to end up dead or worse. But something about this place called to him. Perhaps it was the psychic screams that occasionally pierced the void, or maybe it was simply that he had grown tired of watching evil flourish while he did nothing. Either way, he found himself drawn to investigate. Using his natural ability to phase shift through space, Zephyros materialized inside one of the asteroid's many tunnels. His form shrank and condensed until he resembled a large lizard, though his golden eyes remained the same. It was an old trick, one that had served him well over the millennia. The tunnel reeked of fear and desperation. Emergency lighting cast sickly red shadows on the walls, and the air recycling system wheezed with mechanical distress. This was a place designed for suffering, every detail calculated to break the spirit of whoever was unfortunate enough to find themselves here. As he moved deeper into the facility, Zephyros began to hear voices. The harsh clicking language of the Valdris echoed from ahead, punctuated by sounds that made his scales bristle with rage. Someone was screaming. He rounded a corner and found himself looking into a large chamber through a partially open blast door. What he saw there would be seared into his memory forever. The room was a torture chamber, pure and simple. Alien devices lined the walls, their purposes unclear but their intent obvious. Energy fields hummed with malevolent purpose, and the air tasted of ozone and pain. In the center of it all was a human girl. Zephyros had encountered humans before, of course. They were one of the younger species, barely having achieved interstellar travel a few centuries ago, but they had made quite an impression on the galactic community. They were adaptable, resilient, and had an annoying tendency to survive in situations that should have killed them. They were also, from what he understood, fiercely protective of their young. This particular human was small even by their standards, probably barely into what they called adulthood. She had been strapped to some kind of examination table, her dark hair matted with sweat and blood. Burns and cuts covered her pale skin, and one of her arms hung at an unnatural angle. But it was her eyes that caught Zephyros's attention. Even through the pain, even with tears streaming down her face, there was something unbroken in those brown eyes. Defiance, fury, the kind of rage that could move mountains or topple empires if properly channeled. 3 Valdris stood around her, their instruments gleaming in the harsh light. The lead torturer, distinguished by the elaborate scarification on his carapace, was speaking into a recording device. Subject designation, Human Female 7, shows remarkable resistance to standard neural disruption techniques. The creature clicked in galactic standard, increasing pain stimulation to level 8. Note that previous subjects of similar species expired at level 6. The girl's scream echoed off the walls as electricity coursed through her body. Her back arched against the restraints, muscles straining, but she did not break. When the current stopped, she glared up at her tormentors with pure hatred. "Go to hell," she gasped in accented standard. The Valdress made what might have been a laugh. Fascinating. The subject maintains verbal coherence and aggressive posturing even under extreme duress, beginning psychological pressure techniques. One of the other Valdress activated a wall display. Images flickered to life, showing scenes that made even Zephyros's ancient heart clench. A human colony under attack, buildings burning, bodies in the streets, men, women, and children cut down without mercy. Your homeworld of Haven's Rest fell 6 days ago. The lead torturer informed her with clinical detachment. 3 million of your species dead, your family among them. The girl's defiance cracked for just a moment. Pain flashed across her features, and her breathing became ragged. But then something incredible happened. The pain transformed, crystallizing into something harder and more dangerous than anything Zephyros had seen in centuries. "You're lying," she whispered. "The bodies have been harvested for biological components. Your government has declared the colony a total loss. You are alone, human female 7. You are nothing. You will tell us what we want to know about human military capabilities, or we will simply take it from your corpse." The girl closed her eyes, and for a moment Zephyros thought she might finally break. Then she opened them again, and the dragon saw something that sent a chill down his spine. She was no longer just angry. She was calculating. "My name," she said quietly, "is Sarah Chun, not human female 7. And you just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic lives." The Valdress looked at each other, compound eyes glittering. Threats from a restrained subject. How quaint. Shall we proceed to physical amputation? "Please do," Sarah said with a smile that belonged on the face of a predator. "I want to remember every single thing you do to me." That was when Zephyros realized what he was looking at. This wasn't just a human girl being tortured. This was a human girl planning revenge. And if the stories about her species were even half true, that was a very dangerous thing indeed. He had seen enough. The dragon began to withdraw, his mind already working on a plan. The Valdress thought they were dealing with a helpless victim, but Zephyros had lived long enough to recognize a sleeping volcano when he saw one. This human was going to erupt, and when she did, it was going to be spectacular. But first, he needed to understand more about what was happening here. Why had the Valdress specifically targeted humans? What information were they after? And most importantly, how many more prisoners were being held in this nightmare facility? As he moved through the corridors, Zephyros began to piece together a larger picture. This wasn't just a random slaving operation. The Valdress were conducting some kind of systematic study of human capabilities, both physical and psychological. They were testing pain tolerance, mental resilience, tactical thinking under duress. They were preparing for war. The thought chilled him more than he cared to admit. Humans were dangerous enough when they were scattered across dozens of colony worlds, each one developing its own local military. But if someone managed to unite them against a common enemy, if someone gave them a reason to work together instead of squabbling among themselves, the galaxy might not survive what came next. Zephyros found more holding cells as he explored deeper into the facility. Dozens of them, each containing a member of a different species. But the humans were kept separate in a special section that reeked of desperation and determination. He counted at least 20 of them, ranging from what looked like barely adult youngsters to grizzled veterans with scars from a dozen conflicts. They were all being subjected to the same treatment. Torture, psychological manipulation, forced interrogation about military capabilities. The Valdress were building a database, learning everything they could about humanity's strengths and weaknesses. What they didn't seem to understand was that they were also providing motivation. One cell contained an older human male, his gray hair matted with blood, but his blue eyes still sharp with intelligence. Another held a woman covered in the kind of scars that spoke of a military background. Each of them bore the same look as Sarah Chun. They were hurt, yes, They were suffering, certainly, but they were not broken. They were angry. Zephyros made his way back towards Sarah's cell, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was simply curiosity about how this would play out. Perhaps it was the recognition of a kindred spirit, another being who had looked into the abyss and decided to stare back. The torture session was still ongoing when he returned. Sarah had been moved to a different device, one that seemed designed to cause maximum pain while keeping the subject conscious. Her screams echoed through the chamber, but between them, he could hear her voice. She was counting. 37, 38, 39. The Valdris didn't seem to notice. They were too focused on their instruments, too absorbed in their clinical documentation of human suffering. But Zephyros understood what she was doing. She was keeping score. The session went on for another hour. Sarah counted every shock, every cut, every moment of agony the Valdris inflicted upon her. When they finally stopped, she had reached 215. "You have remarkable endurance," the lead torturer admitted as they began to pack up their equipment. "We will resume tomorrow with enhanced techniques." Sarah turned her head to look at him, and her smile was like winter moonlight on fresh snow. Beautiful and terrible and absolutely merciless. "I'll be waiting," she promised. After the Valdris left, Zephyros remained in the shadows, watching. Sarah lay strapped to the table, her body a map of fresh wounds, but her breathing was steady and controlled. She wasn't unconscious. She was thinking. "I know you're there," she said quietly, not turning her head. The dragon froze. That was impossible. He was phase-shifted, existing partially outside normal space. No one should have been able to detect him. "You're breathing," Sarah continued conversationally. "It's different from the recycled air. Deeper, older, and I can smell sulfur. Either this place has a gas leak, or there's a dragon watching me." Zephyros materialized fully, resuming his lizard form as he crept into the light. Sarah turned her head and studied him with those calculating brown eyes. "Hello there," she said. "Fancy meeting you in a place like this." The dragon found his voice, speaking in the whispered tones his kind used when they didn't want to be overheard. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess. Plus, if I was a centuries-old space dragon and I saw something this messed up happening, I'd probably want to check it out too. Question is, are you here to help, or are you just rubbernecking?" Zephyros considered his options. Getting involved would be dangerous. The Valdris had connections throughout the criminal underworld, and dragons were not as numerous as they once were. But something about this young human's attitude intrigued him. "What makes you think I would help?" Sarah's smile turned predatory. "Because you're still here. If you're just curious, you would have left after the first few minutes. But you stayed. You watched. You're angry too." She was right, and they both knew it. "What do you want from me, human?" "My name is Sarah, and what I want is very simple. I want to get out of here. I want to find my friends. And then I want to come back and show these bug-faced bastards what happens when you mess with humanity." Zephyros studied her for a long moment. "And what happens when you mess with humanity?" Sarah's eyes glittered with dark promise. "Why don't you stick around and find out?" 3 days passed before Zephyros made his decision. 3 days of watching Sarah endure torture that would have killed most beings twice over, and 3 days of watching her methodically catalog every injury, every pain, every face responsible for her suffering. The other human prisoners had begun to notice the dragon's presence as well. Word spread through the facility's underground network of tapped pipes and whispered conversations. The humans had developed their own communication system, one that the Valdris monitoring equipment couldn't detect. It involved subtle changes in breathing patterns, Morse code tapped on cell walls, and a dozen other techniques that spoke of military training. Zephyros learned their names by listening. There was Marcus Webb, the older man with the intelligent eyes, who had been a colonial defense coordinator before his capture. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the scarred woman who had served as a field medic in 3 different conflicts. Lieutenant James Park, barely older than Sarah, but already bearing the weight of command. And a dozen others, each with their own story of loss and determination. They were planning something. The dragon could sense it in the way they moved, The way they looked at their captors, the careful coordination of their seemingly random actions. But whatever they were planning, it wouldn't be enough. The Valdris had weapons, numbers, and the advantage of controlling the battlefield. That was when Zephyros realized he had already made his choice. The moment he had seen Sarah's defiant smile, the moment he had heard her promise of retribution, he had committed himself to this path. Everything since then had just been rationalization. On the fourth night, he made contact. Sarah was alone in her cell, having been returned from another interrogation session. The Valdris had escalated their methods, introducing neural probes and biochemical agents designed to break down mental barriers. Most beings would have been a gibbering wreck by now. Sarah was composing poetry. "The stars are cold tonight," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the hum of the facility's machinery. But not as cold as the hearts of those who think they've won. Not as cold as the space between breaths, where vengeance lives and waits. Zephyros materialized in his lizard form, keeping to the shadows. "You're planning something." Sarah didn't seem surprised by his appearance. "We're always planning something. It's what humans do. We plan, we adapt, we survive, and then we return the favor. Usually with interest. Your fellow prisoners, they're soldiers. Most of them." The Valdris made the mistake of thinking that meant they were just grunt muscle. What they don't understand is that human soldiers are also engineers, tacticians, scientists, and about a dozen other things. We're not a specialized species. We're generalists. We're the ultimate multi-tool. She turned to look at him directly, her brown eyes reflecting the dim light like polished obsidian. "The question is, are you going to help us? Or are you going to keep lurking in the shadows, feeling guilty about not helping?" "What makes you think I feel guilty?" "Because you're here. Because you keep coming back. And because I've read the old stories about your kind. Dragons don't just watch. You either fight or you flee. And you haven't fled." Zephyros found himself impressed despite the circumstances. For a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel, humans seemed to have developed a remarkably sophisticated understanding of other sentient beings. "What do you need?" he asked. Sarah's smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Information. How many guards are there? What's the layout of this place? Where do they keep the weapons? And, most importantly, where do they keep their ships?" "You're planning to escape." "We're planning to escape, regroup, and then come back with friends. Lots of friends. The kind of friends who carry really big guns and have a serious problem with people who torture prisoners." Over the next hour, Zephyros shared everything he had learned about the facility. The guard rotations, the security systems, the locations of key equipment. Sarah absorbed it all with the focused intensity of someone who understood that lives depended on getting the details right. "There's something else," the dragon said finally. "This isn't just a random slaving operation. The Valdris are preparing for a larger conflict. They're systematically studying human capabilities, building a database of your species' strengths and weaknesses." Sarah's expression darkened. "How long have they been doing this?" "Based on what I've observed, at least a year. Possibly longer." "And how many facilities like this are there?" "I don't know. But given the scale of the operation, I would estimate dozens." For the first time since he had met her, Sarah looked truly shaken. The implications were staggering. If the Valdris had been conducting this kind of systematic intelligence gathering for over a year, they knew things about human military capabilities that even some human governments didn't know. "We need to move faster than planned," she said finally. "If this is part of a larger war preparation, then every day we delay could mean thousands more human deaths. Your people are formidable warriors. Surely they can defend themselves." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't understand. We're not just formidable warriors. We're also really, really good at killing each other. Right now, humanity is scattered across hundreds of colony worlds, each with its own government, its own military, its own agenda. We spend more time fighting among ourselves than we do facing external threats." She paused, staring at the ceiling of her cell. "But if someone attacks us as a species, if someone gives us a common enemy to focus on, that changes everything. The Valdris think they're studying our weaknesses, What they're actually doing is preparing to wake up something that's been sleeping since we left Earth. And what is that? Sarah's eyes met his, and Zephyros saw something in them that made his ancient blood run cold. It was the look of a predator that had just realized it was being hunted and had decided to become the hunter instead. Unity, she said simply. When humanity truly unites against a common enemy, when we stop fighting each other and start fighting together, we become something else entirely. Something that makes the old Earth legends about berserkers and crusaders look like bedtime stories. The dragon considered this. He had lived long enough to see species rise and fall, to watch civilizations bloom and wither. But he had never encountered anything quite like what Sarah was describing. Most species became more civilized as they advanced, more careful about conflict. Humans seemed to become more dangerous. How do we contact our people? We don't. Not directly. But there's a way to get a message out that will reach the right ears. Marcus used to work in colonial intelligence. He knows the emergency protocols. If we can get to the communication array, he can send a coded burst transmission that will alert the human defense networks. And then? Sarah's smile was terrible and beautiful. Then, we wait for the cavalry to arrive. And while we're waiting, we make sure these Valders understand exactly what they've gotten themselves into. The plan they developed over the following days was audacious in its simplicity. The Valders had made one crucial mistake in their security arrangements. They had assumed their prisoners were broken, demoralized, and incapable of coordinated action. They were wrong on all counts. The human prisoners had been using their torture sessions to map the facility. Every time one of them was taken for interrogation, they memorized guard positions, security protocols, equipment locations. Every time they were moved through the corridors, they noted potential escape routes and defensive positions. They had been planning this escape since the first day of their captivity. They just hadn't had the means to execute it. Until now, Zephyros could provide things they couldn't. His ability to phase shift through solid matter made him the perfect infiltrator. His natural resistance to energy weapons made him nearly invulnerable to the Valder security systems. And his age and experience made him a tactical asset they desperately needed. The communication array is in the central hub, Marcus explained during one of their clandestine meetings. It's heavily guarded, but if our friend here can get us past the outer security perimeter, we can fight our way to it. And then? Dr. Vasquez asked. Then, I send a message that will bring every human military unit within 50 light years down on this place like the wrath of God. Marcus replied grimly. What about the other prisoners? Lieutenant Park wanted to know. We can't just leave them. We won't, Sarah said firmly. The plan has 3 phases. First, we secure the communication array and send the message. Second, we take control of the armory and free the other prisoners. Third, we turn this facility into a fortress and hold it until reinforcements arrive. And if reinforcements don't arrive, someone asked. Sarah's expression didn't change. Then, we make sure the Valdris regret ever hearing the word human. The escape began at 0300 ship time, during the period of minimum guard activity. Zephyros had spent the previous night disabling key security systems, using his ability to phase through walls to access areas that should have been impregnable. The first phase went almost perfectly. The dragon's reconnaissance had been thorough, and the humans moved with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of countless hours of training. They had fashioned weapons from scavenged materials, created distractions using the facility's own systems against it, and moved through the corridors like ghosts. The Valdris Night shift never knew what hit them. Marcus reached the communication array first, his fingers flying over controls that should have been alien to him, but that he somehow understood. Human adaptability was truly remarkable, Zephyros reflected. Give them any technology, and within minutes they would figure out how to use it, improve it, or weaponize it. The coded message went out as a compressed data burst, transmitted on multiple frequencies simultaneously. To anyone monitoring communications, it would look like routine maintenance traffic. But to the right recipients, it would be a call to arms. Message sent, Marcus reported. ETA for the cavalry is approximately 18 hours, assuming they scramble immediately. 18 hours is a long time, Dr. Vasquez observed. Then, we'd better make sure we're still here to greet them when they arrive, Sarah replied. The second phase began immediately. The armory was located 2 levels down from the communication hub, and it was much more heavily defended. The Valdres had finally realized something was wrong, and they were responding with military efficiency. That was when the humans showed why they were considered one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Valdres fought with the disciplined coordination of a hive mind. Their tactics were sound, their equipment was superior, and they had numerical advantage. By any rational analysis, they should have won easily. But humans didn't fight rationally. They fought with a creativity and ferocity that seemed to border on insanity. They used the facility's own infrastructure against its defenders, turning life support systems into weapons and maintenance corridors into ambush points. They improvised explosive devices from cleaning supplies and medical equipment. They coordinated attacks using a combination of military hand signals and what appear to be popular music references that somehow conveyed tactical information. And they never, ever stopped moving forward. Zephyros found himself swept up in the assault despite his better judgment. There was something infectious about human determination, something that made ancient dragons abandon caution and charge headlong into battle alongside creatures a fraction of their age. The armory fell after 3 hours of fighting. The cost had been high. 2 of the human prisoners were dead, and several others were seriously wounded, but they had achieved their objective. More importantly, they had sent a message that would resonate throughout the criminal underworld. Humans didn't break. They bent, they adapted, they endured. And then they broke everything else. The third phase was the most dangerous. Holding the facility against reinforcements while waiting for rescue meant turning a prison into a fortress. It meant using captured weapons and equipment to create defensive positions that could withstand a prolonged siege. It meant showing the galaxy what happened when you gave humans time to prepare. Sarah stood in the facility's main command center, surrounded by monitors showing the approach of Valdres reinforcement ships. Her face was calm, her movements precise and economical. The girl who had been strapped to a torture table just days before was now commanding a desperate battle for survival with the skill of a seasoned general. "They're coming," she announced to the assembled humans and their dragon ally. 12 ships, full battle configuration. Estimated arrival time, 90 minutes. "Can we hold them off?" Lieutenant Park asked. Sarah's smile was like winter starlight. "We're about to find out. But first, let's show them what we found in their databanks." The main display flickered to life, showing a star map marked with dozens of locations. Each one represented a facility like this one, a place where humans were being tortured, studied, prepared for a coming war. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said quietly, "meet the enemy's entire intelligence network. Every location, every operation, every single facility where they've been hurting our people." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "When our people arrive," Sarah continued, "they're not just going to rescue us. They're going to have a target list that will let them roll up the entire Valdres intelligence apparatus in a single coordinated strike." She turned to face her companions, her expression fierce with purpose. "We just have to make sure we're still alive to hand it to them." Outside, the stars began to move as enemy ships approached. But inside the facility, something extraordinary was happening. Humans were doing what they did best, turning an impossible situation into an opportunity, and preparing to make their enemies regret ever underestimating the depth of human determination. The first wave of Valdres reinforcements arrived exactly when their tactical computers predicted they would. 12 warships, sleek and deadly, their hulls gleaming like beetle shells in the light of the nearby star. They moved with the mechanical precision typical of their species, taking up optimal attack positions around the asteroid facility. What they found waiting for them was not what their intelligence had prepared them for. The humans had spent the previous 90 minutes turning the mining facility into something resembling a military installation. They had repositioned the asteroid's defensive weapons, created overlapping fields of fire, and somehow managed to boost the shield generators beyond their normal operational parameters. More importantly, they had turned the facility's own mining equipment into instruments of war. Incoming transmission. Marcus reported from his position at the communication console. The lead ship is demanding our surrender. Sarah, who had taken command of the defense by virtue of being the only one present who seemed to understand both human tactics and alien psychology, didn't even look up from the tactical display she was studying. Tell them we'll surrender as soon as they explain why they've been torturing prisoners in violation of every civilized law in the galaxy, she said calmly. I don't think they're interested in explanations. Then, they're about to get a very unpleasant education. The first attack came 15 minutes later. The Valdris ships opened fire with coordinated precision, their energy weapons creating a light show that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. The facility's shields flared and sparked under the bombardment, but they held. What happened next surprised everyone, including the humans who had planned it. The asteroid's mining lasers, normally used to cut through solid rock, had been retargeted and recalibrated. When they fired back at the attacking ships, they carved through military-grade armor like it was made of paper. 2 Valdris vessels exploded in brilliant flowers of flame and debris before their commanders realized what was happening. How in the 7 hells did you do that? Zephyros asked, his draconic form coiled around one of the facility's main support pillars. Simple physics, Dr. Vasquez explained as she monitored the weapon systems from her jury-rig control station. Mining lasers are designed to cut through the densest materials in the universe. Military ship armor is designed to deflect energy weapons, not survive industrial cutting tools. The Valdris fleet regrouped quickly, their remaining ships spreading out to avoid the devastating mining lasers. But the humans had anticipated this as well. The asteroid's position near the edge of a debris field had seemed like a disadvantage when the facility was built. Now it became a tactical asset. Initiating mining charges, Lieutenant Park announced from his position at the demolition controls. The humans had planted explosives throughout the debris field, turning chunks of rock and ice into guided missiles. As the Valdris ships maneuvered to avoid the mining lasers, they flew directly into a storm of high-velocity projectiles that their point defense systems couldn't possibly intercept. 3 more ships vanished in expanding clouds of superheated gas and metal fragments. "This is impossible," the Valdris fleet commander transmitted on an open channel, his clicking voice filled with what might have been panic. "You are prisoners. You are broken. You cannot fight like this." Sarah picked up the communication handset with a smile that would have made a shark proud. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of a Human Defense Initiative. You made one small mistake in your calculations." "What mistake?" "You assumed we were broken. We're not broken. We're angry. And when humans get angry, we don't break things. We fix them. Permanently." The battle continued for another hour. The remaining Valdris ships tried every tactic in their considerable arsenal, but the humans seemed to anticipate each move before it was made. They used the asteroid's rotation to present constantly changing firing angles. They employed the debris field like a 3-dimensional maze, forcing their enemies to fight on ground of human choosing. Most importantly, they fought with a coordination and creativity that defied everything the Valdris thought they knew about military tactics. "How are you doing this?" Zephyros asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Your species has been spacefaring for barely 3 centuries. These Valdris have been waging interstellar war for millennia." Sarah was bent over a tactical display, calculating firing solutions with the focused intensity of someone who understood that mathematics could be the difference between life and death. "Experience isn't everything," she said without looking up. "Sometimes fresh eyes see things that old ones miss, such as the fact that the Valdris fight like a computer program. They have protocols, procedures, established doctrines. Very efficient, very predictable. but they don't adapt well to chaos. She gestured at the display, which showed the remaining enemy ships trying to reform their attack formation. Humans, on the other hand, are chaos specialists. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. We've had to develop tactics that work against opponents who think like we do, who can anticipate our moves because they're just as crazy as we are. And that helps against aliens how? Sarah's grin was sharp enough to cut Diamond. Because aliens think logically. They assume their opponents will make rational decisions based on available information. They can't comprehend the idea of someone doing something completely insane because it's the only thing their enemy won't expect. As if to illustrate her point, the humans chose that moment to do something that violated every principle of defensive warfare. They opened the facility's main docking bay and launched every small craft they could find directly at the largest remaining Valdres ship. The enemy commander, trained to recognize standard attack patterns, deployed point defense systems to intercept what he assumed were guided missiles or fighter craft. What he got instead were empty cargo shuttles and maintenance pods flying on ballistic trajectories straight toward his ship. While his weapons were engaged, destroying these meaningless targets, the real attack came from an entirely different direction. The mining lasers, which had been temporarily shut down to conserve power, suddenly fired at maximum capacity from positions the Valdres had thought were disabled. The flagship split in half, its reactor containment failing in a spectacular display of uncontrolled fusion. That, Sarah said with satisfaction, is why humans are dangerous. We don't just think outside the box. We forget there was ever a box to begin with. The remaining Valdres ships began to withdraw, their commanders finally recognizing that they were not dealing with broken prisoners, but with something far more dangerous. They had encountered humanity's true nature, and they wanted no part of it. But Sarah wasn't finished with them yet. Target their engines, she ordered. Disable, don't destroy. I want prisoners. Prisoners. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her station. Why? Because they're going to answer some questions, starting with how many more facilities like this exist, and ending with where we can find the people responsible for this whole operation. The captured Valdres were brought to the facility's main conference room, a space that had been hastily converted from its original purpose as a torture chamber. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The lead prisoner was a high-ranking officer whose carapace bore the scarification marks of a ship commander. He sat in the specially designed chair with his compound eyes fixed on Sarah, who had taken the position at the head of the table. You will tell us nothing, he clicked defiantly. We are Valdres. We do not break. Sarah leaned back in her chair and studied him with the same clinical detachment his people had shown to their human prisoners. That's interesting, because I've been reviewing your species psychology profiles, and I think you might be wrong about that. She activated a wall display that showed detailed anatomical diagrams of Valdres physiology. Your people evolved from hive insects, didn't you? Social creatures that depend on the approval and support of their colony for psychological stability. Take away that support, isolate an individual Valdres from his people, and interesting things start to happen. The prisoner's antennae twitched nervously. You know nothing of our nature. I know enough. For instance, I know that your people have a physiological response to isolation that's roughly equivalent to what humans call claustrophobia, except 1,000 times worse. I know that prolonged separation from other Valdres causes a cascade of neurochemical reactions that lead to permanent psychological damage. Sarah stood and began pacing around the prisoner's chair. I also know that your ship commanders are selected for their independence and ability to function away from the hive, which means you're already operating at the edge of your psychological tolerance just by being out here in space. She stopped directly in front of him and smiled. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to answer my questions completely and truthfully. And in exchange, I won't lock you in an isolation cell for the next 6 months while your mind slowly dissolves into gibbering madness. The Valdres officer's entire body began to shiver, his carapace making tiny clicking sounds as his plates shifted against each other. You cannot. It would be torture. Would it? I prefer to think of it as creative interrogation. After all, You didn't seem to have any problems with torture when it was humans on the receiving end. Marcus, watching from the side of the room, felt a chill run down his spine. He had served in military intelligence for 20 years, had conducted hundreds of interrogations, but he had never seen anything quite like this. Sarah wasn't threatening violence or physical pain. She was threatening something far worse, the complete dissolution of the prisoner's sense of self. And she was doing it with the same calm professionalism the Valdres had shown in their torture chambers. "What do you want to know?" the prisoner whispered. "Everything, starting with how many facilities like this one exist." The information that poured out over the next several hours painted a picture of an intelligence operation vast beyond anything the humans had imagined. The Valdres had been systematically capturing and studying members of dozens of species, but humans have been their primary focus for the past 2 years. What? Sarah wanted to know. What makes humans so special? The Valdres commander's compound eyes fixed on her with what might have been resignation. "Because you're the only species we have ever encountered that becomes more dangerous when threatened. Most sentient beings seek to avoid conflict, to find peaceful solutions to disputes. Humans become more creative, more determined, more willing to sacrifice everything for victory." He paused, his antennae drooping with exhaustion. "Our war planners believe that humanity represents an existential threat to the established order of the galaxy. If you are allowed to expand and develop without restraint, you will eventually challenge every other major power. Not out of malice, but simply because it is your nature to push boundaries, to explore new possibilities, to refuse to accept limitations. So you decided to study us. We decided to understand you, so that we could develop strategies to contain you. Or, if containment proved impossible, to eliminate you before you became too powerful to stop." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about slavery or criminal enterprise. This was about genocide. The Valdres were planning to wipe out humanity before humans could become a threat to their vision of galactic order. "How long before the main attack?" Sarah asked quietly. The final phase was scheduled to begin in 6 months. Coordinated strikes against every major human colony, designed to look like natural disasters or accidents. Your species would be reduced to a few scattered survivor populations, manageable and controllable. Sarah nodded, as if she had expected this answer. "And now?" "Now," the Valdres commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Now our entire intelligence network has been compromised. Our secret facilities have been exposed. And, worst of all, you have given humanity exactly what we were trying to prevent, which is unity, a common enemy, a reason to stop fighting among yourselves and start fighting together." His compound eyes glittered with what might have been admiration or terror. "We have awakened the very thing we sought to destroy." As if summoned by his words, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Marcus rushed to the communication console and activated the external sensors. "Multiple contacts incoming," he announced. "Human fleet signatures. Looks like the cavalry has arrived." Sarah walked to the main view screen and watched as dozens of human warships dropped out of hyperspace around the asteroid. Ships from a dozen different colonies, flying under the flags of governments that had been feuding with each other for decades. But today they flew together. "Commander Chun," came a voice over the communication system. "This is Admiral Morrison of the Terra Nova Defense Fleet. We received your transmission. Are you secure?" Sarah picked up the communication handset, her voice steady despite everything they had been through. "Admiral, this is Sarah Chun. We are secure, and we have intelligence on enemy operations that you're going to want to see immediately." "Understood. Prepare for boarding. We're coming to get you out of there." Sarah looked around the room at her fellow prisoners, at the dragon who had chosen to help them, at the Valdres prisoners who were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had unleashed. "No, sir," she said finally. "We're not ready to leave yet. We have work to do." "Work?" Sarah's smile was like the dawn of a new age, beautiful and terrible and full of promise. "We have a war to plan." 6 months later, Zephyros floated in the void above what had once been the Valder's homeworld. Where a thriving planet had existed just days before, there was now nothing but debris and radioactive dust slowly dispersing into the cosmic void. The sight filled him with a mixture of awe and terror that he hadn't experienced in over a millennium. The humans had kept their word. They had planned a war, and they had won it with a thoroughness that defied belief. The rescue fleet that had arrived at the asteroid facility had been just the beginning. Within hours of receiving Sarah's intelligence package, human military commanders across the galaxy had begun coordinating the largest joint operation in their species' history. Old grudges were set aside, territorial disputes were postponed, and resources were pooled with an efficiency that impressed even the ancient dragon. But it was the speed of their response that truly demonstrated humanity's potential for organized violence. Most species, when planning a major military campaign, spent months or even years in preparation. They developed detailed strategies, conducted extensive simulations, and moved with careful deliberation. Humans had launched their counterattack in less than 72 hours. The first phase had been surgical strikes against the intelligence network Sarah's team had uncovered. Simultaneous raids on 43 Valder's facilities across 12 star systems, coordinated to the microsecond to prevent word from spreading. The rescued prisoners told stories of human assault teams that moved like ghosts, struck like lightning, and showed no mercy to their captors. The Valder's leadership had tried to respond, but they discovered that their carefully planned genocide had one critical flaw. They had studied human military capabilities, but they had failed to understand human military culture. Humans didn't just fight wars. They weaponized everything they touched. The second phase had been economic warfare on a scale never before seen in the galaxy. Human traders, who had been dismissed as minor players in galactic commerce, revealed themselves to be part of an interconnected network that could choke the life out of entire star systems simply by refusing to do business. Supply lines that had operated for centuries suddenly collapsed. Critical resources became impossible to obtain. Entire Valder's colonies found themselves cut off from the rest of their civilization. The third phase had been psychological warfare that leveraged humanity's greatest weapon, their reputation for absolute brutality when provoked. Human ships began appearing in Valder's space, not to attack, but simply to be seen. They broadcast messages on all frequencies, messages that consisted entirely of lists. Names of humans who had died in Valder's facilities, descriptions of the tortures that had been inflicted, and promises of what was coming next. The messages were delivered in perfect Valderus, spoken by humans who had taken the time to learn the language specifically for this purpose. But they were also broadcast in dozens of other languages, ensuring that every species in the galaxy understood exactly what the Valderus had done and what humanity intended to do about it. The psychological impact had been devastating. The Valderus were a proud species, accustomed to seeing themselves as the apex predators of their region of space. Discovering that they had been marked for extermination by beings they considered primitive mammals had shattered their collective confidence. The fourth phase had been the one that convinced Zephyros that humans were not just dangerous, but potentially unstoppable when properly motivated. They had offered amnesty to any Valderus who surrendered and provided information about the genocide plot, not just to military personnel, but to civilians, scientists, even government officials. The only requirement was complete cooperation and a willingness to testify about their species' crimes against humanity. Thousands had taken the offer. The Valderus social structure, built around hive loyalty and collective identity, had proven remarkably fragile when subjected to sustained pressure. Individual Valderus, faced with the choice between personal survival and species loyalty, had chosen themselves with a frequency that surprised everyone except the humans who had planned it. Sarah, whom Zephyros now knew held the rank of commander in something called the Human Intelligence Corps, had explained it to him during one of their strategy sessions. Every social structure has pressure points, she had said, studying a holographic display that showed Valder's political networks in real time. The trick is finding them and applying exactly the right amount of force. Too little, and nothing changes. Too much, and you just make martyrs. But get exactly right, and you can collapse entire civilizations without firing a shot. And if they don't collapse? Her smile had been sharp enough to cut through space-time itself. Then, we fire a lot of shots. The final phase had been military action of a sort that redefined what the galaxy understood about human warfare. The humans had not simply attacked Voldris military targets. They had attacked the concept of Voldris military supremacy. Every engagement had been designed not just to achieve tactical victory, but to demonstrate human superiority in every aspect of warfare. Voldris ships, considered among the most advanced in the galaxy, have been systematically hunted down and destroyed by human vessels that seem to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. Voldris ground forces, trained to fight with mechanical precision, have been outmaneuvered by human troops that seem to anticipate their every move. Most terrifying of all, the humans had demonstrated an ability to adapt and innovate in real time that bordered on the supernatural. Voldris weapons that were effective in the first battle of an engagement would be useless by the third, countered by human defensive measures that shouldn't have existed yet. How do you do it? Zephyros had asked Sarah during the final assault on the Voldris homeworld. How do you adapt so quickly? Practice, she had replied without taking her eyes off the tactical display. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years. Every possible tactic, every conceivable strategy, every form of warfare you can imagine, we've used it against ourselves at some point. When we fight aliens, we're not learning new techniques. We're just applying lessons we learned fighting other humans. The dragon had found this explanation both enlightening and terrifying. Most species developed their military doctrines through theoretical study and limited conflicts. Humans had developed theirs through millennia of total war against opponents who thought exactly like they did. They were not just warriors. They were warfare itself, given form and purpose. Now, floating above the grave of an entire civilization, Zephyros contemplated the implications of what he had witnessed. The Voldris had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had focused on human military capabilities while ignoring human military culture. Humans didn't just wage war. They experienced it. It shaped their art, their literature, their philosophy, their entire understanding of existence. They had developed strategies and tactics not out of theoretical necessity, but out of desperate need to survive conflicts that would have destroyed other species entirely. And when someone had threatened to commit genocide against them, they had responded with the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years of warfare. A communication signal interrupted his brooding. Sarah's voice, transmitted from the command ship of the human fleet, reached him across the void. Zephyros, are you out there? I am here, Commander. We're about to begin the final phase. I wanted to give you a chance to withdraw if you prefer not to witness what comes next. The dragon considered this. He had already seen more than enough to understand what humans were capable of when sufficiently motivated. But something about Sarah's tone suggested that there was more to come, something that even he might find disturbing. What is the final phase? There was a long pause before she answered. Ensuring this never happens again. Zephyros watched as human ships took up positions around what remained of the Voldris homeworld. Construction vessels began deploying something he didn't immediately recognize, metallic structures that looked like monuments or markers. What are those? He asked. Memorial beacons. Each one contains a complete record of what the Voldris did, transmitted on all frequencies in every major galactic language. Ships passing through this system will receive the full story of the Voldris genocide plot and what happened to them as a result. The dragon felt a chill run through his ancient bones. You're creating a warning. We're creating a lesson. Every species in the galaxy is going to know what happened here. They're going to know that the Voldris tried to commit genocide against humanity, and they're going to know that we responded by erasing their entire civilization from existence. And if some species sees this as a threat, Sarah's laugh was devoid of any warmth or humor. Then they'll think very carefully before they decide to threaten human lives. The memorial beacons activated as Zephyros watched, their signals reaching out across the galaxy with a message that would echo through the cosmos for millennia to come. The message was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. This was what happened when someone tried to destroy humanity. This was what happened when humans decided to unite against a common enemy. This was what happened when the galaxy's newest spacefaring species revealed what they were truly capable of. Over the following weeks, as the human fleets dispersed back to their respective territories, Zephyros remained in the dead system to observe the galactic reaction to what had transpired. The responses varied by species, but certain patterns emerged quickly. The older, more established civilizations reacted with a mixture of shock and calculation. They had witnessed the complete destruction of a major military power in less than 6 months, achieved through a combination of military excellence and strategic brilliance that exceeded anything in their historical records. Emergency sessions were called in dozens of galactic councils, and the topic was always the same: how to avoid becoming the next Valdris. The younger species reacted with either awe or terror, depending on their previous relationships with humanity. Those who had been friendly found themselves suddenly elevated in galactic politics, their status enhanced by their association with the newest apex predators. Those who had been hostile discovered that their neighbors were no longer interested in supporting conflicts that might anger humanity. The criminal organizations that had worked with the Valdris simply disappeared. Word spread through the underworld faster than light. Humanity was now permanently off limits. Anyone who harmed a human, for any reason, would face not just individual retaliation, but the coordinated wrath of an entire species that had just demonstrated its ability to erase civilizations. But it was the reaction of one particular group that caught Zephyros' attention and held it: the dragons. His people had always been solitary creatures, ancient and proud and supremely confident in their individual power. They had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations with detached interest, secure in the knowledge that no single species could threaten beings who had survived for millennia. Now, for the first time in living memory, the dragons were calling a gathering. The message reached him 3 weeks after the memorial beacons went active. A summons carried by quantum-entangled particles across impossible distances, calling every dragon in the galaxy to assemble at the traditional meeting place near the galactic core. The reason given was simple. Humanity had changed the fundamental balance of power in the galaxy, and the dragons needed to decide how to respond. Zephyros almost ignored the summons. He had little interest in the politics of his people, and even less desire to spend months in the company of other dragons who would undoubtedly spend most of their time arguing about precedence and protocol. But then he received another message, this one from Sarah. "I heard about your gathering," she transmitted from a human colony 3 systems away. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did to help us. Without your assistance, a lot more humans would have died, and we might not have been able to stop the Valdris before they launched their attack." She paused, and he could hear something in her voice that might have been regret. "I know what we did was brutal. I know that erasing an entire species from existence is going to have consequences that we probably can't even imagine yet. But they were going to kill billions of innocent people, including children who had never done anything to hurt anyone. We couldn't let that happen." Another pause. "I hope your people understand that we're not looking for enemies. We didn't do this because we want to rule the galaxy or because we enjoy destroying civilizations. We did it because someone threatened our families, our children, our future. And we'll do it again if we have to, but we'd much rather find ways to coexist peacefully." The message ended there, but it left Zephyros with much to consider. Sarah had touched on the central question that would undoubtedly dominate the gathering. Were humans a threat that needed to be contained, or potential allies that offered new possibilities? The answer, he realized, might determine the future of the galaxy itself. As he prepared to leave for the gathering, Zephyros took one last look at the memorial beacons floating where the Valdris homeworld had once been. Their signals continued to broadcast humanity's message to the stars, a declaration that would echo across space and time until the heat death of the universe itself. The message was simple, but its implications were profound. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage not with words of peace or promises of cooperation, but with the systematic annihilation of those who had threatened them. And every civilization in the galaxy was now trying to decide what that meant for their own future. The Great Gathering had not been called in over 4,000 years. The last time dragons from across the galaxy had assembled in one place, the dominant species on Earth had still been learning to make fire. Now, as Zephyros approached the ancient meeting ground near the galactic core, he could see dozens of his kin already present, their massive forms coiled around the crystalline structures that had served as neutral territory since time immemorial. The sight filled him with conflicting emotions. Dragons were magnificent creatures, each one unique in coloration and bearing the scars of millennia of experience. But they were also intensely proud, territorial, and absolutely convinced of their own superiority. Getting them to agree on anything more complex than the time of day was usually impossible. Today, however, they would have to reach a consensus. The question of what to do about humanity was too important to leave unresolved. Elder Pyrian, whose golden scales had dimmed with age but whose eyes still burned with ancient wisdom, called the gathering to order with a roar that shook the crystalline spires around them. At over 7,000 years old, he was one of the few dragons present who remembered the last great gathering, and his word carried weight even among beings who acknowledged no authority but their own. "We are here," he announced in the formal cadences of Old Draconic, "to discuss the humans." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Around the circle, dozens of dragons shifted uneasily. Some had come from distant corners of the galaxy specifically for this meeting. Others had been observing human expansion for decades. All of them had heard what happened to the Valdris. They destroyed an entire species, declared Vorthak the Flamebearer, his red scales reflecting the light of nearby stars. Erased a civilization that had existed for millennia. No single species should possess such power. The Valdris were planning genocide, countered Seraphina, whose silver scales marked her as one of the youngest present. The humans acted in self-defense. Self-defense. Vorthak's laugh was like the rumble of an active volcano. They obliterated the Valdris homeworld and every colony. Trillions of beings dead. That is not defense. That is extermination. Zephyros listened to the debate with growing concern. The arguments were following predictable lines, with older dragons viewing humanity as a threat that needed to be contained, and younger ones expressing grudging admiration for their effectiveness. But he sensed something else beneath the surface, something that worried him more than open hostility. Fear. Dragons had ruled their respective territories through a combination of individual power and the threat of draconic retribution. They had been secure in the knowledge that no single species could challenge their dominance. Now, suddenly, that assumption was no longer valid. "May I speak?" Zephyros asked, his voice cutting through the growing cacophony of argument. Elder Pyrian's golden gaze fixed on him. "You were present during the human campaign against the Valdris. Your perspective would be valuable." The circle fell silent as all attention focused on Zephyros. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, knowing that his words might influence decisions that would affect the entire galaxy. "I was there," he began, "from the beginning. I saw the Valdris torturing human prisoners. I witnessed the escape, the battle, the planning that followed. And I watched as humanity transformed from a collection of squabbling colonies into a unified force that reshaped the balance of power in their entire region of space." He paused, meeting the eyes of dragons who had lived for millennia. "What I saw was not mindless aggression or bloodthirsty conquest. What I saw was a species that had been pushed beyond all reasonable limits, and that responded with a level of strategic thinking and tactical innovation that exceeded anything in my experience." "You speak as if you admire them," Vorthak growled. "I respect them," Zephyros replied carefully. "There is a difference. The humans did not seek out this conflict. It was brought to them by beings who saw them as a threat to be eliminated before they became too powerful to stop. The irony is that by acting against humanity, the Valdris created the very unity they feared. And now we must decide whether humanity poses a similar threat to us, Elder Pyrian observed. Do they? Zephyros asked. I have spent the last several months reviewing human history, studying their literature, observing their behavior. They are indeed dangerous, but not in the way most of us assume. He gestured to the assembled dragons with one wing. We have always based our understanding of power on individual capability. A dragon is mighty because of what a single dragon can accomplish. But humans are not individuals in the way we understand the term. They are a collective organism, capable of coordination and cooperation on a scale that dwarfs anything we have achieved. Exactly why they must be contained, Vorthak interjected. Must they? Or could they perhaps offer us something we have never had before? The question sent ripples of unease through the gathering. Dragons did not seek partnerships or alliances. They were solitary apex predators who occasionally cooperated when absolutely necessary, but who fundamentally viewed all other beings as either subjects or threats. What could humans possibly offer us? Asked Nithara the Starwalker, whose deep blue scales marked her as one of the void-touched dragons who spent most of their time in deep space. Zephyros had expected this question, and he had spent considerable time preparing his answer. Purpose, he said simply. The word hung in the crystalline air like a physical presence. Around the circle, dragons shifted uncomfortably, their ancient minds grappling with a concept that challenged everything they thought they knew about themselves. We are immortal, Zephyros continued. We live for millennia, accumulating knowledge and power and wisdom. But what do we do with it? We hoard treasure that has no meaning beyond our own satisfaction. We guard territories that could be better used by younger species. We watch civilizations rise and fall without intervening, even when our knowledge could prevent suffering or guide development. We are above such concerns, Vorthak declared, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. Are we? Or have we simply convinced ourselves that isolation is the same as superiority? Zephyros let his gaze sweep the circle. When was the last time any of us truly mattered to the galaxy? When was the last time our actions changed anything beyond our immediate surroundings? The silence that followed was deafening. Humans matter, Zephyros continued. They matter because they care about things beyond themselves. They form connections, build communities, create art and literature and music that speaks to the hearts of beings they have never met. They explore not just to satisfy curiosity, but to find new homes for their children. They fight not just to defend themselves, but to protect principles they believe in. He paused, letting his words sink in. They have something we have forgotten how to have. They have passion, and passion, properly channeled, can reshape the galaxy itself. Elder Pyrian was the first to break the silence. You suggest an alliance. I suggest we consider the possibility that humanity's rise might not be a threat to us, but an opportunity. They need guidance. They are powerful and determined, but they're also young and prone to mistakes that could have catastrophic consequences. They could benefit from the wisdom and perspective that only we can provide. And in return? Nithara asked. Zephyros smiled, showing teeth that could bite through starship hull plating. In return, we become relevant again. Instead of watching history unfold from a distance, we help shape it. Instead of hoarding knowledge, we share it with beings who will use it to build something greater than the sum of its parts. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days and nights. Dragons argued with the kind of passionate intensity that their species was famous for, bringing up precedents from millennia past and hypothetical scenarios that might not occur for centuries to come. But gradually a consensus began to emerge. Not unanimous. Dragon politics were never that simple, but a majority view that would guide their species' relationship with humanity for the foreseeable future. The decision was formalized in the ancient manner, with each dragon stating their position clearly and unambiguously. When the final vote was counted, the result was closer than Zephyros had hoped, but more decisive than he had feared. The dragons would approach humanity with an offer of limited alliance. Not submission. Dragons would never submit to anyone or anything. Not partnership in the full sense, since that would require a level of equality that dragons were constitutionally incapable of accepting. But a carefully structured relationship that would allow both species to benefit from the unique strengths of the other. Humans would gain access to draconic knowledge and perspective accumulated over millennia of observation and experience. Dragons would gain purpose and relevance in a galaxy that was changing too rapidly for any single species to navigate alone. The details would be worked out through careful negotiation, with safeguards and escape clauses that would protect both sides from potential exploitation. But the principle had been established. Dragons and humans would work together, at least for now. As the gathering dispersed, dragons departing for their distant territories with news of the historic decision, Elder Pirion approached Zephyros with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Do you truly believe this will work?" the ancient dragon asked. "I believe it is worth trying," Zephyros replied. "The alternative is to watch from the sidelines as humanity either flourishes beyond our ability to influence or destroys itself through inexperience. Neither outcome serves our interests. And if the humans prove untrustworthy, if they attempt to use our knowledge against us." Zephyros' smile was sharp and confident. "Then we remind them why dragons have survived for millions of years while entire civilizations have risen and fallen around us. But I do not think it will come to that. Humans are many things, but they are not stupid. They will recognize the value of what we offer, just as we must recognize the value of what they can provide." Pirion nodded slowly. "Then it falls to you to make the initial contact. You know them better than any of us." "It will be my honor." The meeting with humanity's leadership took place 2 months later in a neutral system that had been carefully chosen for its symbolic value. The conference was held aboard a massive space station that had been constructed specifically for diplomatic purposes, with environmental controls that could accommodate beings from dozens of different species. Sarah was there, of course, now bearing the rank of admiral and serving as humanity's chief military strategist. She was accompanied by representatives from every major human colony, united in a way that would have been impossible before the Valdres crisis. Zephyros arrived in his full draconic form, his scales gleaming in the artificial sunlight of the station's central chamber. The sight of a creature nearly a kilometer long materializing in their midst caused a considerable stir among the human delegates. But Sarah simply smiled and stepped forward. "Zephyros," she said formally, "on behalf of the Human Alliance, I welcome you to this historic gathering." "Admiral Chun," the dragon replied, inclining his massive head in a gesture of respect. "I bring greetings from the Dragon Conclave, and a proposal that may interest your people." Over the following days, they hammered out the basic framework of what would become known as the Terran Draconic Accord. It was a document unlike anything in galactic history, establishing formal relations between two species that had nothing in common except a mutual recognition of each other's potential. Humans would provide dragons with purpose and connection to the larger galactic community. Dragons would provide humans with knowledge and perspective that could help them avoid the mistakes that had destroyed countless civilizations before them. Both species would maintain their independence and territorial integrity, but they would also work together on projects that serve their mutual interests: exploration, scientific research, and the delicate task of managing humanity's relationships with other galactic powers. The signing ceremony was broadcast across human space, watched by billions of beings who were still coming to terms with their species' transformation from minor players to major power. For most of them, it was their first glimpse of a dragon, and the sight was both magnificent and terrifying. But it was the words spoken during the ceremony that would be remembered by history. "Today," Sarah announced to the watching galaxy, humanity takes another step toward maturity as a space-faring civilization. We do so not through conquest or domination, but through the recognition that even the mightiest species can benefit from wisdom and friendship offered in good faith. Zephyros, his ancient voice carrying across the centuries, added his own perspective. In all my millennia of existence, I have never witnessed a species with such potential for both creation and destruction. Today, dragons pledge to help ensure that humanity's tremendous power is directed toward the former rather than the latter. The ceremony concluded with a demonstration that would become legend throughout the galaxy. Human ships and the dragon Zephyros, working in perfect coordination, constructed a monument in space, a crystalline structure that would serve as a permanent reminder of the day two ancient species chose cooperation over conflict. As the monument took shape, its faceted surfaces reflecting the light of nearby stars, beings across the galaxy watched and wondered what this new alliance might mean for the future. Some saw it as a dangerous concentration of power that needed to be countered. Others viewed it as an opportunity to form their own partnerships with increasingly influential humanity. But perhaps the most significant reaction came from the youngest species in the galaxy, those who were just beginning to reach for the stars. For them, the Terran Draconic Accord represented something that had never existed before, proof that even the mightiest beings in the cosmos could choose growth over stagnation, cooperation over domination. It was a lesson that would shape the development of galactic civilization for millennia to come. Years later, as Zephyros floated in the void near the monument they had built together, he reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. It had begun with a young human girl being tortured in a forgotten asteroid facility. It had continued with her refusal to break, her determination to resist, her species' incredible capacity for unified action when properly motivated. And it had culminated in something none of them could have imagined. A true partnership between two of the galaxy's most formidable species, based not on fear or necessity, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. The girl, now Admiral Sarah Chun, commander of humanity's first joint dragon-human exploration fleet, had indeed shown the galaxy what happened when someone tried to destroy humanity. But she had also shown them something else. She had shown them what humanity could become when given the chance to choose their own destiny, guided by wisdom and tempered by experience. As Zephyros watched human and dragon ships working together to map new star systems and make contact with emerging civilizations, he realized that the torture chamber where he had first encountered Sarah had been more than just a place of suffering. It had been the birthplace of a new age. An age where the galaxy's newest apex predators chose to be shepherds instead of conquerors, teachers instead of tyrants. An age where humanity, supported by ancient wisdom and armed with terrible purpose, would help guide the galaxy toward a future none of them could yet imagine. And, perhaps most importantly, an age where the answer to the question, what happens when you threaten humanity, would not just be we destroy you utterly. It would also be we make sure no one ever has to ask that question again.